In recent years, every time humanitarian flotillas set sail toward Gaza with food, medicine, and aid, they are met with a powerful blockade. The Israeli Navy intercepts them, sparking international outrage, political debates, and human rights questions. But what really happens when these ships approach Gaza's shores, and why is the world divided over it? Let's dive deep into this unfolding story. Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're exploring one of the most controversial maritime stories in the Middle East, the Israeli Navy stopping humanitarian flotillas on their way to Gaza. These flotillas are not warships, but rather small vessels carrying food, medical supplies, and activists who say they want to break the blockade around Gaza. From the outside, it looks like a simple mission of compassion, people risking their lives to deliver essential goods to those in need. But the story is far more complicated than it seems. Israel insists that it must intercept these ships to prevent weapons smuggling, while activists and humanitarian organizations claim this is nothing more than collective punishment of innocent civilians. The blockade itself dates back to 2007, when Hamas took control of Gaza. Since then, Israel and Egypt have restricted access to the territory. Every time a flotilla is launched, international headlines follow. Some see the activists as heroes, while others view them as political provocateurs. In this video, we'll break down what actually happens when flotillas approach Gaza, the arguments on both sides, the global reactions, and the personal stories of people on board. Stay tuned because this is a story about courage, politics, and human struggle on the high seas. The first thing to understand is why flotillas even exist. Gaza is home to nearly 2 million people, most of whom live under very difficult conditions. Food insecurity, electricity shortages, and a lack of medical supplies are part of everyday life. While aid does enter Gaza through official border crossings, activists argue that the blockade prevents sufficient humanitarian relief and restricts freedom. That's where flotillas come in. These ships, often organized by international coalitions of activists, attempt to reach Gaza's ports by sea. Their goal is symbolic as much as practical. They want to challenge the legitimacy of the blockade. For them, the act of sailing toward Gaza is an act of resistance, a way to draw attention to the humanitarian crisis. But Israel sees things differently. Officials argue that without strict monitoring, Gaza could receive shipments of weapons, explosives, or materials used for building rockets. In their view, humanitarian aid is just a cover for potentially dangerous smuggling. This leads to dramatic confrontations at sea, with naval vessels ordering the flotillas to divert. Some flotillas comply and are redirected to Israeli ports where cargo is inspected. Others resist, leading to tense standoffs, sometimes even violence. These moments are what capture the world's attention, fueling debates in international law, human rights, and global diplomacy. The flotillas, whether successful or intercepted, highlight the daily struggle of Gaza's people and the political battle surrounding them. When a flotilla sets sail, it usually doesn't go unnoticed. Israeli intelligence tracks the ships from the moment they leave port. Often these flotillas begin their journey from places like Turkey, Greece, or Cyprus. On board, there are not just aid supplies but also international activists, journalists, and sometimes politicians. This presence is intentional. Organizers want to create global awareness and ensure that if Israel intercepts them, the world will be watching. As the ships approach Gaza's waters, Israeli Navy vessels issue warnings through radio. They demand the flotilla reroute to the Israeli port of Ashdod for inspection. Israel promises that if the cargo is humanitarian, it will be delivered to Gaza through official channels. But activists argue that this undermines their mission. Their aim is to reach Gaza directly, without Israel controlling the process. Tensions rise at this moment. If the flotilla refuses to comply, Israeli commandos may board the ships. This is risky as any resistance, verbal or physical, can quickly escalate. In the past, there have been violent clashes, injuries, and even deaths during these interceptions. The standoff at sea is more than a military maneuver. It's a symbolic confrontation between two narratives. Israel's argument for security and the activists' fight for freedom of movement. Each side claims legitimacy, and every encounter sparks heated debates in the United Nations, international courts, and media outlets worldwide. The flotillas may be small, but the waves they create in global politics are massive. One of the most well-known flotilla incidents occurred in 2010 with the Mavi Marmara, part of the Gaza Freedom Flotilla. The ship, carrying over 600 activists, was intercepted by Israeli commandos in international waters. What followed became one of the most controversial moments in modern maritime history. The activists claimed they were unarmed and on a peaceful mission to deliver aid. Israel, however, stated that when their commandos boarded the ship, they were attacked with sticks, knives, and even metal rods. In response, Israeli forces opened fire, and the clash left 9 activists dead, with another dying later from wounds. The event shocked the world. Protests erupted in many countries, particularly Turkey, whose citizens made up most of the casualties. Diplomatic relations between Turkey and Israel collapsed for years. International investigations were launched, and the United Nations called the raid unlawful, while Israel defended it as an act of self-defense. The Mavi Marmara became a turning point in how the world viewed flotillas. For activists, it was proof that Israel would use deadly force to maintain the blockade. For Israel, it was evidence that flotillas were not purely humanitarian but politically motivated confrontations designed to provoke international outrage. Since then, every flotilla launch has carried echoes of the Mavi Marmara. Governments, NGOs, and media outlets pay closer attention, knowing the risks and remembering the bloodshed of that fateful night. After the Mavi Marmara incident, the dynamics of flotilla missions changed significantly. Activist groups became more cautious, while Israel tightened its rules of engagement. Still, flotillas kept sailing. Some were small yachts with just a handful of passengers, while others carried dozens of activists and journalists determined to reach Gaza's shores. Israel repeatedly stated that it has the right to enforce a maritime blockade, citing international law during armed conflict. Officials argue that since Hamas controls Gaza and has launched rockets at Israeli towns, restricting sea access is a necessary security measure. For Israel, allowing unchecked ships could mean opening a route for weapons from countries hostile to its existence. Activists, however, challenge that interpretation. They point to international humanitarian law, which prohibits collective punishment. They argue that blocking even basic goods like cement, medical equipment, and fishing supplies has devastated Gaza's civilian population. To them, flotillas are not just about aid, they're about exposing what they call the legal siege of Gaza. What's remarkable is the diversity of people on these boats. Doctors, priests, human rights lawyers, Nobel Peace Prize laureates, and even parliamentarians have joined flotillas. They see their participation as a moral duty, an attempt to shed light on suffering that many believe is ignored or downplayed. Every confrontation at sea, even if non-violent, becomes a powerful media moment. Images of armed commandos boarding small civilian ships spark emotional reactions worldwide, amplifying calls to end the blockade and raising tough questions about Israel's policies. Global reactions to these flotilla incidents have been divided, reflecting broader geopolitical divides. On one hand, countries sympathetic to the Palestinian cause strongly condemn Israel's actions. Turkey, for example, became one of the most vocal critics after the Mavi Marmara raid. Many Arab and Muslim majority nations call the blockade a violation of human rights. On the other hand, Western allies like the United States and several European countries often support Israel's right to self-defense, while still urging restraint. For them, the focus is on preventing weapons from reaching Hamas rather than the symbolic struggle of flotillas. This split reveals the deep polarization in international diplomacy over the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Meanwhile, humanitarian organizations like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch argue that Israel's blockade amounts to collective punishment, which is illegal under international law. They stress that civilians in Gaza should not suffer because of political and military disputes. Each interception, in their view, reinforces the humanitarian crisis and violates basic human dignity. The media plays a critical role too. News channels broadcast dramatic images of naval ships surrounding small boats, of activists being dragged off vessels, and of confiscated supplies. Social media amplifies these stories even more, with hashtags, viral videos, and online campaigns sparking heated debates. For activists, these moments are victories. Even if they don't reach Gaza, they succeed in drawing international attention. For Israel, however, every flotilla is framed as a test of its security, a challenge it cannot afford to lose. Beyond politics and international diplomacy, the human stories on these flotillas are often the most compelling. On board, you'll find volunteers who left behind their comfortable lives to face an uncertain journey. Many are doctors or nurses carrying medical supplies, eager to help hospitals in Gaza where shortages are life-threatening. Others are faith leaders, priests, imams, rabbis, sailing together to symbolize peace and solidarity across religions. For some, it's deeply personal. There are activists who have lost loved ones in conflicts, and they see their participation as a way to transform grief into action. Others are seasoned campaigners who have been involved in anti-war or human rights movements for decades. What unites them is a belief that the blockade is unjust and must be challenged, even if it means being arrested, deported, or facing danger at sea. Interviews with participants often reveal a mix of fear and determination. They know Israeli naval forces will likely intercept them, but they accept that risk. Some say, if we cannot deliver the aid, at least the world will see us trying. This sense of moral duty of bearing witness makes their efforts powerful even when they fall short of their goals. The human dimension of these flotillas reminds us that this is not just a story about governments, policies, or military strategies. It's about ordinary people who believe in extraordinary acts of courage, trying to challenge one of the most entrenched blockades of the modern era. For Israel, the interception of flotillas is not just a tactical operation, it's a strategic necessity. Israeli officials often point to history, noting how weapons have been smuggled into Gaza through tunnels, trucks, and even hidden in humanitarian shipments. They argue that if the sea route were left unmonitored, it could become a direct pipeline for missiles, explosives, and other threats. To enforce this, Israel maintains one of the most advanced naval blockades in the world. Its navy deploys fast attack boats, submarines, drones, and helicopters to monitor the eastern Mediterranean. When a flotilla approaches, the goal is to stop it before it reaches Gazan waters. Navy officers broadcast warnings offering the option of docking at Ashdod. If ignored, they prepare for boarding operations. These operations are carried out by Shaytet 13, Israel's elite naval commando unit. Trained for complex maritime missions, they are equipped with non-lethal tools but also carry live weapons. Boarding a civilian vessel filled with activists is one of their most delicate tasks. It requires a balance between force and restraint. From Israel's perspective, every successful interception reinforces its control of the blockade and prevents a potential breach. They argue that humanitarian aid can still reach Gaza, but only after inspection to ensure no hidden weapons are included. Critics see this as a justification for collective punishment, but for Israeli leaders, it's framed as a matter of national survival. The clash between humanitarian motives and military security creates a cycle that continues to repeat, year after year. Every flotilla, whether intercepted or not, sparks ripple effects far beyond the waters of the Mediterranean. Court cases have been filed in international tribunals, activists have testified before parliaments, and diplomatic relations have been reshaped by these incidents. The flotillas are often small in size, but politically they're enormous. In some cases, cargo from intercepted ships has been delivered to Gaza after inspection. But activists argue this misses the point. Their mission is not just about aid, it's about breaking the blockade itself. They see every interception as evidence of oppression, while Israel insists it is proof of vigilance. The legal debates surrounding the blockade are also complex. Some international lawyers argue that blockades are permissible during armed conflict, but only if they don't cause disproportionate harm to civilians. Human rights organizations say the humanitarian cost in Gaza clearly outweighs any legal justification. This tension fuels continuous debate in the United Nations, the International Criminal Court, and countless NGOs. What's certain is that flotillas have succeeded in keeping the Gaza blockade in the headlines. Without them, the crisis might remain a background issue. Instead, every interception becomes a global story, forcing people to ask difficult questions about morality, legality, and human suffering. In the end, the flotillas are not just boats. They are floating protests, symbols of defiance against a status quo that millions around the world believe must change. Looking forward, the question remains, will flotillas continue, and will they ever succeed in breaking the blockade? Activist networks around the world say yes. They plan new missions each year, despite the risks. Some see them as the only way to keep international attention focused on Gaza's humanitarian crisis. But Israel shows no sign of easing its stance. Officials repeat that as long as Hamas rules Gaza and continues to launch rockets, the blockade is essential. In their eyes, lifting restrictions on the sea could create a direct threat to Israeli civilians. That leaves flotillas stuck in a cycle. Activists sail, Israel intercepts, and the world reacts. The real victims of this struggle are the civilians of Gaza. For them, whether flotillas succeed or fail, daily life remains a struggle. Power cuts, shortages of medicine, high unemployment, and limited freedom of movement shape their existence. Humanitarian organizations continue to call for political solutions rather than symbolic confrontations at sea. At its core, this story is about more than ships, borders, or blockades. It's about human dignity, safety, and justice. Until those fundamental questions are answered, flotillas will continue to set sail, and navies will continue to intercept them. The sea, as always, remains both a barrier and a battleground, carrying with it the hopes of the oppressed and the fears of the powerful.